In the year 397 AD, Emperor Honorius issued a decree that, from our modern perspective, seems almost absurd. Pants were declared illegal in Rome. Yes, a garment we take for granted today was once the target of prohibitions and severe penalties, including exile. But why would such a practical and functional piece of clothing be outlawed by Roman authorities? What was behind this aversion to a garment that, centuries later, would dominate wardrobes worldwide? Today, we will delve into the curious rejection that both Greeks and Romans had toward pants. We will explore how clothing in antiquity was not only practical, but also a powerful cultural symbol. And in the end, we'll understand how that resistance was eventually overcome by reality and by the climate. So, fasten your belt if you're wearing pants. Let's begin.
To understand the rejection of pants, we first need to explore what the Greeks and Romans wore in their daily lives. Unlike modern societies, which prioritize comfort and functionality, clothing in antiquity was also a statement of identity, status, and cultural belonging. The ancient Greeks preferred loose, flowing garments suited to their warm Mediterranean climate. The most iconic men's garment was a himation, a large rectangular piece of fabric draped around the body and secured with folds. Although it might look like a simple sheet to the untrained eye, its arrangement required skill and technique. Under the himation, many men wore the chiton, a light tunic reaching the knees, perfect for those engaged in physical labor. Women, on the other hand, typically wore the peplos or the female chiton, garments that reached down to the ankles and were fastened at the shoulders with brooches. Here's an intriguing historical anecdote. On one occasion, a group of Athenian women killed a man using the brooches from their garments, proof that even simple clothing could become an improvised weapon. Roman clothing, like the Greeks, Romans favored loose garments, but placed even greater emphasis on their symbolic value. The Roman toga was the hallmark of male citizens, especially for public events and ceremonies. It was a massive, semicircular woolen cloth, often up to 6 meters wide. Draping it correctly was so complex that wealthy families employed specialized slaves just to fold it properly. However, the toga was heavy, uncomfortable, and hot for daily wear, leading many Romans to prefer the tunica, a far more practical and breathable garment. Married women, meanwhile, wore the stola, a sleeveless dress often complemented by a mantle. In both cultures, garments were typically loose and draped straight down, never tightly fitted around the legs. The idea of covering the legs with form-fitting clothing felt odd, unnecessary, and, to some, inelegant. But this perception wasn't just about fashion or climate. It was also deeply tied to cultural identity. Tightly fitted garments like pants were not only seen as impractical within the classical aesthetic, they were also associated with something very specific, the barbarians. And that leads us to the next point. In the mindset of the ancient Greeks and Romans, clothing was not a mere fashion statement, but a symbol of identity. And within that identity lay a fundamental distinction. They were the civilized ones, while everyone beyond their borders was considered a barbarian. Interestingly, pants were a hallmark of these foreign peoples. Greeks and Romans observed with bewilderment how Persians, Scythians, Gauls, and Germanic tribes wore tight-fitting pants, often adorned with colorful patterns and thick fabrics. For societies that prize simplicity and the elegant drape of fabrics, these fitted garments seemed rustic, strange, and, above all, foreign to their culture. The Persian example, the enemy's extravagance. The Persians, Greece's long-standing rivals, wore long tunics paired with brightly decorated trousers. Greek art frequently depicted them in these garments, reinforcing their image as others, exotic, foreign, and even ridiculous. To the Greeks, these pants symbolized the excessive luxury and softness they often attributed to Persian customs. Gauls and Germanic tribes, barbarian practicality. In contrast, the Gallic and Germanic tribes wore pants for purely practical reasons. They lived in cold regions with harsh winters, where a simple tunic or loose garment offered little protection. Their tightly woven woolen trousers, often striped and paired with fur cloaks, were essential for survival in their severe climate. Yet, Romans looked down on these garments. In their collective imagination, pants became a symbol of roughness, violence, and uncivilized behavior. Wearing pants was, symbolically, adopting the customs of those whom Rome had battled for centuries. Fashion or identity. This rejection of pants was more than a practical matter. It was a cultural barrier. Clothing, in this context, served to mark boundaries. What was classical, elegant, and Roman should remain free from external influence. However, what initially seemed like an untouchable tradition soon clashed with an undeniable reality: the cold of the northern frontiers and the practical needs of the Roman army. The cultural resistance to pants was strong, but there was a force even more powerful than social conventions: the climate. The Roman Empire, which had expanded from the warm Mediterranean lands, encountered a starkly different reality upon reaching its northern frontiers. Provinces such as Britannia, Germania, and the regions near the Danube had harsh winters and a far more severe climate than Italy or Greece. For Roman soldiers stationed in these cold regions, wearing a simple tunic was not just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. The extreme cold made long marches, night watches, and military maneuvers difficult. The solution was to adopt the very garment they had long despised: pants. Campaign trousers, the beginning of change. Roman soldiers began wearing bracchi, a type of fitted trouser that reached the knees or, in colder regions, extended down to the ankles, made of wool or leather. These trousers were often paired with cloth strips wrapped around the calves, serving as makeshift leg warmers. Directly inspired by the barbarian peoples they once scorned, these pants proved invaluable on the battlefield. Initially, this practical attire was limited to military use and northern provinces. However, as soldiers returned to Rome or transitioned into civilian roles, they brought the custom with them. Little by little, pants began to infiltrate Roman daily life, challenging centuries of cultural convention. From necessity to symbol of change, this practical adaptation marked a break from the past. The Romans, who had once ridiculed pants, began to associate them not only with cold climates, but also with military discipline and valor. Yet, the shift was neither immediate nor without controversy. Many within the Roman elite viewed pants as a threat to tradition and social order. To them, adopting the attire of former enemies felt like a breach of Roman identity. Nevertheless, the demands of the empire and the northern cold proved decisive. Togas and tunics simply weren't enough. In the end, practicality prevailed over prejudice, though not without resistance. Rome was a society deeply rooted in its traditions. Clothing, beyond its practical function, was a reflection of social and cultural order. So, when pants began to gain popularity in everyday Roman life, the elites responded with suspicion and resistance. The situation reached a breaking point in the year 397 AD, when Emperor Honorius issued a decree explicitly banning the use of pants within the city of Rome. The consequences for defying this law were severe. Violators could face lifelong exile. But what prompted such a drastic measure? Fear of barbarization. Since its founding, Rome had defined itself in opposition to foreign peoples. Pants, closely associated with Gauls, Germans, and Persians, became a symbol of cultural infiltration. As the empire fell deeper into internal crisis, fears of a barbarization of Roman customs grew. The elites viewed pants as a symbolic threat. If Roman citizens dressed like the empire's enemies, they might begin to think and act like them. The growing power of the military. During the 3rd and 4th centuries, Rome experienced increasing militarization. Many emperors emerged directly from the ranks of the army, spreading their customs, including wearing pants, into civilian life. This shift unsettled the senatorial and aristocratic classes, who saw their influence waning in the face of military power. Banning pants was, in part, an attempt to reassert the authority of traditional civilian values over military customs. The desire to preserve Roman identity. For centuries, the toga had symbolized Roman citizenship. It was more than clothing. It was a privilege reserved for free men and a mark of status. To many senators, allowing the spread of garments associated with barbarians felt like a betrayal of Roman identity. The decree against pants was, therefore, a desperate effort to preserve Rome's cultural heritage. The rise of pants also symbolized the profound transformation Rome was undergoing. Once proud of its Mediterranean identity, the empire had become a multicultural entity with increasingly visible Germanic influences. What had once been a symbol of barbarism had now become both a necessity and an accepted reality. This transition marked the beginning of a new era. With the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the Germanic cultures that filled the power vacuum embraced pants as a standard garment. By the time Europe entered the Middle Ages, pants had shed their barbarian stigma and become a common piece of clothing throughout the continent, a garment that conquered the world. Remarkably, pants continued their expansion through the centuries, adapting to new fashions, technologies, and societies. What began as a military necessity on the freezing frontiers of the Roman Empire became a global garment that we wear today without a second thought. However, the history of pants reminds us of something essential. Clothing is never just clothing. It reflects our culture, our ideas, and our prejudices. What we consider normal today was once viewed as strange or even threatening. So, the next time you slip on your favorite pair of pants, remember that, centuries ago, wearing them in Rome could have gotten you exiled for life.